last video, I made the case that we do need e-learning, but that it needs to be doing something a lot more special if it's going to deliver on the promise. So let's just recap that argument. First of all, e-learning is just one of various forms of digital learning. We have digital content in all its various forms, linear content we're talking about there. We've got various forms of collaboration, live and asynchronous. We've got a number of high-end methods which we're not going to concern ourselves with now because they're out of reach for many of us. And then we've got self-paced instruction, which is the delivery of lessons, if you like, and that's what we're calling e-learning. We also looked at whether e-learning was delivering on its promise. We said that in terms of efficiency, it's doing quite well. These are statistics from Towards Maturity from a while back. In other words, it's it's cheaper, it's quicker, and more flexible in many ways. So that's good. But on the other hand, when we look at effectiveness, particularly if we compare it with the classroom, then okay, it's probably doing a similar job to the classroom if the methods used are the same, but that doesn't necessarily say so much because the classroom hasn't been terribly effective either. When we compare it with one-to-one instruction, then it falls quite considerably short, particularly because it just doesn't deliver the same personalised experience that you'd get from an individual instructor. And that's something we're going to be looking at today. So why can't it do that? And could we aim towards that? In terms of popularity, unfortunately, no, at the moment it's very unpopular. One of the problems is that it's used for very heavily for compliance training, and that compliance training is not designed terribly well. So it gives e-learning a bad reputation. So that doesn't help, and it's often considered to be a very boring form of training, if you like. Is it commercially successful? It is up to a point, and money has been made from e-learning, but when we compare it with some of the sort of huge growth areas of the last 20 years, it's not anywhere near the same ballpark. Then we made the point that e-learning is needed. It's not something we can just dispense with. Well, at least instruction is needed, e-learning being an efficient way of delivering instruction. So why do we need instruction? Well, two main reasons. One is because there are certain things which people really must know and must be able to do. And instruction is the way that we can make sure that the people really do know those things and are able to do those things, because it works towards a very definite set of objectives. So in that sense, we need instruction, and we can't just rely on it being pulled when people find it's something they want to explore. It's got to be something which is pushed, something which I think both employers and employees would agree is an essential part of learning your job. But secondly, it's also very valuable when our learners are dependent. They are, particularly when they're novices, they don't know what they don't know, they don't know what's important, and they don't necessarily have good strategies for learning. So all of those things mean that instruction gives them the structure and support that they need. So that is clearly important. Nevertheless, we know that e-learning is necessary, but we know it's not delivering, particularly when we compare it with something like one-to-one instruction, particularly in terms of that personalisation that computers promise and do in some contexts deliver, but not necessarily when we're doing self-paced instruction. So what I'd like to do is go back in history to think about how e-learning has developed over the past 40 years and what might be the explanations for why it's gone a little bit astray. So we've had 40 years of self-paced instruction. At the same time, 40 years of massive advances in computer processing power and ubiquity, so that We have massively powerful devices on our wrists, in our pockets, in our cases, and on our desktops, absolutely all over the place. Again, at the same time, we have had 40 years of advances in network bandwidth and ubiquity. So the amount of bandwidth we have is incomparable with what we did have before. We can quite easily show high definition films and watch them on any sort of device, and just about everybody has got access to that bandwidth. Also, we have had 40 years, believe it or not, of my involvement in learning technology. Here I am working on an old Apple II computer way back when. So let's try and think then about, over those 40 years, how has e-learning developed alongside those changes in computer power and in network bandwidth. Let's start with the 1980s. Well, for the first time, we have personal computers, although they are expensive and slow. We also have a small number of academics who have access to a fledgling internet, passes by the vast majority of people, so we can largely ignore that. At that time, we're using terms like CBT, computer-based training, to describe what we do, at least in the workplace. And our focus is on the quality of instruction, and we begin to explore AI for the first time. That might be a surprise to a lot of you who thought AI was something relatively recent, but it had a first wave in the 1980s, not a tremendously successful one, and it sort of disappeared for 20 years, but it nevertheless was a very active academic topic, and something which was brought to bear in the world of CBT as it was then. And I think it's interesting that there was a really strong focus on trying to make the most of what computers can do that you can't do through other media. So it wasn't enough to think about computers as a way of just presenting information, after we could have done that other ways. And we certainly didn't have any opportunities to do things through collaboration, because we didn't have the networking. So we were looking at ways that we can make computers do something we can't do some other way. And what computers do really well is to gather data through input, to store that data, process that data, and then provide personalised output to the user. And that cycle is capable of generating something that you could call a sort of intelligent tutoring. And I think intelligent tutoring was something that was very much on people's minds as a possibility. Well, it didn't happen, but it certainly, could have happened with time as computers got cheaper and more powerful and the tools got that much better. One thing, interestingly, we did have at that time was a very strong interest on open text input, where you had sort of conversational forms of CBT, where you very much got the feel that you were in a dialogue with the author of the program. So you would see far less multiple choice questions at that time. Let's go on to the 1990s. Well, personal computers were becoming commonplace, and many of them had multimedia capability using CD-ROMs. They weren't particularly powerful, but they were powerful enough to deliver a good learning experience. The World Wide Web had appeared, but most computers are still used on a standalone basis, so we couldn't really rely on networking. We're starting to use terms like multimedia to describe what we do. And that gives a clue as to where the emphasis became, because we started to focus on delivering a polished graphical experience, and instruction becomes secondary. In many ways, it seemed in the 1990s, the graphic designer became the kingpin of the e-learning development team, or we weren't calling it e-learning then, but it very much was the focus to deliver something that looks polished. And I think we lost something significantly in terms of our ambition to create personalised forms of instruction. So you got anything like the sense that you were working with a teacher, albeit a virtual one. On to the 2000s. Well, we now have a widespread use of personal computers, and that spreads beyond the workplace into the home. So pretty well everybody had access to some sort of computer. The internet was being used in homes and workplaces and was relatively complex, although still fairly slow and unreliable. We start to use the term e-learning to describe what we do. And we try essentially to do the same as we did before in terms of those polished graphical experiences, except we're now trying to replicate that experience online through a web browser as opposed to from a CD-ROM. So essentially, we haven't really gone anywhere in terms of quality. What we've done is take advantage of a new delivery channel, which allows us to distribute our e-learning programs online, but also to manage that process through a learning management system, which I think obviously created significant benefits for employers. So into the 2010s. Well, the rapid uptake of touchscreen mobile devices means we're now using computers all the time. So we've now got tablets and smartphones, and they're very widely available. High-speed broadband is now also widely available in homes and workplaces and on the move. Other forms of digital learning, particularly video-based content, supported perhaps by social learning to some degree, become widely accepted. In terms of in the corporate arena, meanwhile, we are trying to do the same as essentially we did before, except now on mobile devices rather than on desktops. So it's that same polished graphical experience, except now coming through your mobile device rather than through a desktop or a laptop. But basically, it's the same old material, short of interactivity, short of personalisation, and certainly not in any way imitating the relationship you might have with a teacher. And finally, looking ahead to the 2020s. So we have all the computer power we could ever possibly need, plus a new wave of interest in AI and a lot of skills in AI. Everything is networked, and we can move data around these networks effortlessly, so no excuses there. So all of the infrastructure is in place. We have new tools that allow us to design, develop, and deliver something much better than we have had before, including authoring environments which allow us to create more adaptive experiences and to deliver something more personalized. So as a result, we could just carry on doing what we've always done, ignoring the world around us. But that would be a big mistake. What we could be doing is aligning ourselves with the rest of the online world and using agile approaches in order to deliver personalized, human-centered learning experiences. So let's ask ourselves whether this new e-learning, this more adaptive, personalized e-learning could be more or less successful in the future. Well, first of all, it is likely to be at least as efficient as what we've done before. Adaptivity in itself means that people don't have to do learning that is not necessary. There will be some people who perhaps need to do more learning they did before, but that certainly isn't a bad thing if it means that they do reach the objectives. But by and large, it will be at least as efficient as before, and probably more so. Secondly, will it be effective? Well, it should be now more effective than the classroom because it's more personalised experience than the classroom. This is assuming it's well designed, of course. Interestingly, it could be as effective as one-to-one instruction, and that's, if you like, the benchmark that we're aiming to achieve. In other words, as effective as one-to-one instruction. Okay, it also should become much more popular because of the fact that it is feeling like more human experience, feeling like something which is responding to you as somebody different from everybody else. And that in itself is a more motivating, more satisfying experience. And as a result, it could finally be really commercially successful in the sense that it really does become ubiquitous and delivers something which you cannot get any other way. And that's very exciting. But of course, this future is not guaranteed, because it only has these characteristics if we take advantage of the opportunities. If we really, first of all, have the goal and the mission to try and create something better, something more effective than we have done in the past, and then take the steps necessary to get there. We've got no technological barriers. We've just got the barriers in terms of the fact that we've got rather stuck with a particular model, and the fact that we have to start doing things differently. We can't certainly deliver e-learning the way we do at the moment, where we use desktop tools, publish something which is then uploaded to a learning management system to be delivered. It's completely inflexible in that form. We've got to start generating content on the fly in the same way that pretty well all websites that we go to now are generated. We've just basically got to get up to date. And the whole authoring process needs to be, again, online and collaborative, that we can't continue to do things the way we did 30 years ago. And if we do that, we'll essentially be fulfilling the promise of those pioneers back in the 1980s to create something that you could call intelligent tutoring, something that feels human, feels as responsive as a human being, but on a massively scalable basis. And that's something that's well worth striving for.